Thank you for joining us to learn about the National Voluntary Farm-Level Crop Biosecurity Standard and Producer Guide for the greenhouse, nursery, and floriculture sectors. This presentation is brought to you by the Canadian Plant Health Council, which plays a vital role in supporting plant health across Canada, working with industry stakeholders and producers, federal, provincial, and territorial governments, and academia. In the following slides, we'll dive into the topic of biosecurity and why it is important. We will then go over the Farm-Level Crop Biosecurity Standard and Producer Guide and how implementing their key target outcomes can support greenhouse, nursery, and floriculture producers in managing plant health risks and protecting crops from pests and subsequent crop losses. The standard is voluntary but is a critical component for maintaining crop health and sustainability in agriculture. Farm-level biosecurity is a series of management practices designed to prevent, minimize, and manage the introduction, spread, and release of plant pests. Plant pests can harm crops by causing reduced yields and increasing production costs. A proactive strategy to protecting crops from plant pests enables optimal crop health and productivity and is critical in maintaining the sustainability and profitability of the Canadian agricultural sector. It also ensures continued access to domestic and export markets and assists in opening new markets. Implementing strong biosecurity management practices is the first and often most effective line of defense to reduce risks from plant pests. Why is farm-level biosecurity important? As mentioned, plant pests have a direct impact on the profitability of farming by reducing yields and increasing costs. In addition, the success of Canada's agricultural exports is linked to the excellent phytosanitary status of our crops and crop products. Phytosanitary certification confirms that Canadian plants and plant products are free from pests of concern of the importing countries and are compliant with the relevant international standards and regulations for plant health, ensuring safe trade and preventing the spread of harmful pests across borders. Demonstrating minimal phytosanitary risk is key to maintaining existing export markets, as well as opening and expanding new markets. By adopting biosecurity measures, you help ensure that Canadian products remain competitive on the world stage. Farm-level biosecurity doesn't have to be complicated. Incorporating simple measures into your everyday farm management practices can go a long way. Small, consistent actions are the most effective way to protect your crops and prevent the costly consequences of pest outbreaks. By making biosecurity part of your daily routine, you safeguard your farm and your future. The primary responsibility for biosecurity falls on farm owners and managers. You are the ones who ensure that crops are protected. Developing a written biosecurity plan is encouraged, and this can be done with the help of crop specialists or consultants. It is also important to get cooperation from visitors and service personnel. Everyone on the farm should follow biosecurity protocols. A biosecurity plan starts with a thorough risk assessment to evaluate potential threats. These would include monitoring everyone entering, working on, and exiting the farm, examining pathways for the introduction, spread, or escape of pests of concern. This includes pests that are already established in the area, or invasive pests, and those pests that are not known to occur in the region, and identifying preventative methods to manage or minimize the risk of these pests. The plan should focus on three key components. First, exclusion, or preventing pests from entering the farm. Second, management, or preventing pests from spreading within the farm. And third, containment, or ensuring pests do not escape from the farm and spread to neighboring locations. A farm biosecurity plan will include elements associated with the farm location and layout, operational routines, and crop health management practices. It is important to keep in mind that each farm will have different risks, so your plan should be customized to address your own specific challenges. A national farm-level biosecurity planning guide was put in place to encourage producers to implement the use of sound crop production practices that protect crop health and maximize profits, although they do not guarantee protection from all potential pests. The planning guide identifies the key elements, considerations, and critical points of biosecurity intervention that apply to producers and handlers of agricultural crops. These preventive guidelines are not all-inclusive, but are generally accepted as beneficial management practices for most agricultural crops. One biosecurity plan will not fit the needs of every farm operation, and thus biosecurity plans should be developed to meet the specific needs of each farm. Each operation should incorporate these practices into daily routines that are appropriate for specific high-risk pests. Producers are also encouraged to review their production practices in relation to pest prevention on a frequent basis and ensure their strategies are carried out. An effective biosecurity plan is one that is flexible and open to new knowledge and technology as it becomes available. There are 4 national voluntary farm-level biosecurity standards and guides for crop-based sectors: grains and oilseeds, potato, greenhouse, nursery and floriculture, and fruit and tree nut. The crop biosecurity standards and producer guides are resources designed to help farmers and producers implement effective biosecurity measures within the farm and are meant to complement existing provincial and trade association guides, manuals, and certification programs. Their purpose is to: first, define biosecurity and highlight its importance in protecting crops. Second, provide a proactive approach to managing biosecurity risks. This includes strategies to minimize the introduction and spread of pests, which ultimately saves time and resources and results in higher quality yields and lower costs. And third, describe potential risks and offer risk mitigation tools to address them effectively. As an example, pests can be introduced into the farm through various inputs like seeds, water, soil, etc. So, some of the mitigation tools for these risk factors would include the purchase of high-quality seeds, or seeds that have been tested and found free from pests. Risk mitigation is a process that will identify, assess, and reduce the impact of potential risk, in this case, the introduction of harmful pests to your farm, to minimize loss. The biosecurity standards and producer guides are a practical framework for producers, equipping them with the knowledge and tools to enhance on-farm biosecurity, while aligning with other industry and regional efforts. The biosecurity standards and producer guides were collaboratively developed, drawing on a wide range of expertise. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency worked with stakeholders to develop national voluntary farm-level biosecurity standards and producer guides for several sectors. The development process was supported by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada under the Growing Forward 2 Agricultural Policy Framework. The National Voluntary Farm-Level Biosecurity Standard for the nursery, greenhouse, and floriculture sectors was developed by the Greenhouse, Nursery, and Floriculture Biosecurity Advisory Committee, which includes members from sector associations, producers, academia, and federal and provincial specialists. The development process included a literature review of key topics, a gap analysis of existing farm-level programs, farmer consultation, and ongoing feedback, and input from the advisory group, CFIA, and industry experts. The National Voluntary Farm-Level Biosecurity Standard for the nursery, greenhouse, and floriculture sectors is a national reference document which provides guidance to producers to develop their biosecurity plan. The standard is accompanied by a producer guide which provides more detailed, commodity-specific best practices and other options to be considered to achieve the risk mitigation goals identified in the standard. The standard supports the development and implementation of best management practices in a place of production. However, as this standard applies to the greenhouse, nursery, and floriculture sectors, not all strategies may be available or applicable for each place of production. To develop an effective biosecurity plan, the specific pests of concern for a commodity and place of production must be identified, and the pathways of transmission must be analyzed. In the standard, the principles of biosecurity have been grouped into 3 general areas that are important to a biosecurity plan: plant health management, farm operational management, and education, training, and communication. At the end of the standard is a self-evaluation checklist. The National Voluntary Farm-Level Biosecurity Standard for the greenhouse, nursery, and floriculture sectors identifies key risks, target outcomes, considerations, and critical points of biosecurity interventions based on pest introduction and transmission pathways. Biosecurity is an ongoing cycle, not a one-time effort. First, you assess risks on a regular basis to stay prepared, considering pests that are present and new pests that may arrive. You then address gaps with a clear biosecurity plan and apply preventative and control measures accordingly. Finally, you monitor and gather information on pest activity, reassessing regularly to update the plan as necessary. Biosecurity is a responsibility of everyone. It is recommended that anyone responsible for the health of plants, from small farms to large facilities, consider developing a written biosecurity plan. Measures built into everyday management practices will go a long way toward protecting a place of production from the costly consequences of pests. There are a number of resources that are highlighted in this diagram that can assist you in developing a biosecurity plan. You can start with the National Farm-Level Biosecurity Standard for the greenhouse, nursery, and floriculture sectors. The next references are the specific producer guides for the greenhouse, nursery, and floriculture sectors. You may also wish to consult provincial and trade association production guides, manuals, and farm-level certification programs specific to the biosecurity concerns of your operation. And then finally, to capture the specific biosecurity needs of your operation, you build your own farm-specific biosecurity plan. A biosecurity plan should cover three main biosecurity principles. First is plant health management. This includes proactive measures to promote healthy plant growth and to monitor and manage pests. Then there is farm operational management. This includes a review of the location and layout of a place of production, as well as the risks associated with the movement of people, tools, and equipment, as various activities are carried out within a place of production. The third and final component is education, training, and communication. It is critical to regularly train staff on pest management, hygiene practices, and biosecurity measures. As well, educate and keep service providers and visitors informed about biosecurity practices and risks. We will now discuss in more detail the plant health management practices that need to be incorporated into your operation to promote healthy plant growth and to mitigate pest occurrence. Multiple factors can individually and collectively affect the health status of a plant, such as soil quality, water quality, presence of pests, and environmental factors. The incidence and severity of an outbreak relates to the interaction of a susceptible crop, a pest, and an environment favorable to pest development. Let's look at general management practices that can optimize the production of healthy plants. These include using clean/certified plant material, such as seeds and cuttings, from reputable suppliers, choosing pest-tolerant varieties or cultivars, receiving and storing inputs in designated areas to prevent introduction and spread of pests to plants, and inspecting for signs and symptoms and presence of pests. Keeping purchase, production, and storage records. Records of the source of a production input, number of plants, and date planted can be important when responding to a pest detection. Using clean potting, harvest, and transport containers. Maintaining a clean water system. Monitor water quality and avoiding water pooling. Water quality and quantity may impact the health of a plant and increase vulnerability to pests. Avoiding the movement of soil between farm operations or designated areas, as soil is a high-risk pathway for many pests. Monitoring plant stresses, for example, environmental, physical, cultural, and nutritional stresses, and maintaining plant health throughout the growing season. You can reduce plant stress by maintaining optimal environmental controls and protecting against inclement weather, which in turn can minimize pest outbreaks. And finally, implementing an integrated pest management program. Integrated pest management is a decision-making process that takes many factors into account when deciding upon a treatment. Next, maintaining plant health includes a proactive implementation of biosecurity measures at critical points and pathways of pest transmission. Managing vectors and interrupting the pathways of pest transmission can reduce crop damage and minimize economic losses. Pathways of pest transmission include biological vectors such as insects, birds, mammals, and workers within the place of production, physical vectors such as packing materials and equipment, and environmental vectors such as wind and surface water. Other practices include inspecting inputs such as new plants, propagated material, soil, manure, and compost for the presence of pests prior to bringing them into production areas. Managing biological vectors, for example, insects or nematodes, using chemical, cultural, or biological controls. Locating compost piles away from production areas as they may serve as homes for unwanted animals and pests. And ensuring proper disposal of diseased or infested plants. Plant health management practices also include pest monitoring to minimize production losses through the early detection of pests. The development and implementation of a monitoring program allows for the detection of new and common pests. Pest monitoring is essential to determine when pests are about to reach a threshold and when control measures should be implemented. To that end, it is recommended to keep employees informed and trained to identify pests. Consider providing pest fact sheets or information sheets that explain how to identify pests of concern. Maintain accurate and routine plant scouting reports. Records can be used in future years to predict times of high risk. Elements to be recorded might include location, date, crop type, control strategy implemented, and the success of this strategy. As part of your monitoring program, make sure to inspect storage and shipping areas for signs of pests. Consult professional agrologists or other professionals as required when help is needed developing a monitoring program or identifying a pest. When a suspected problem is noticed, take steps to identify and manage the pests. And make sure that employees are informed of the process to report pest detections. Plant health management also includes responding to a pest by having an integrated pest management program in place to control and manage the spread of pests. In some cases, formal response plans may also be needed to facilitate an effective and timely response to pests of greater concern. This will help to minimize production losses. When a pest is found, it is recommended to collect and preserve pest samples to ensure accurate identification, especially for unknown pests. Record the exact location of the pest detection, and use signage to prevent potential spread to restrict the movement of people and equipment into and out of the infested area. Develop a response procedure for staff to follow, including cleaning of vehicles, equipment, or clothing when exiting the infested area. Cleaning will be determined based on the pest pathway of transmission. Ensure to carry out proper debris and waste disposal through deep burial or off-site, such as at a municipal disposal facility. Select a method of disposal that minimizes the risk of pest spread. Apply proper pest control measures and evaluate their effectiveness. And contact your local CFIA office if a regulated pest is found, as well as your respective provincial or territorial government. Include contact information in your response plan. Let's move now to farm operational management practices that need to be in place to implement an effective biosecurity plan. It is necessary to evaluate the risks associated with activities that are carried out at the place of production. Biosecurity risks can originate from the location of the place of production, the movement of people, vehicles, and equipment, and the movement of production inputs and outputs. The natural environment surrounding a place of production is important for identifying the source and nature of potential pests in the area. Understanding the layout of a place of production and neighboring places of production is vital information for helping to reduce the risk of pest introduction and spread. It is important to have a good knowledge of the location and layout of a place of production to evaluate the use of new production sites or to protect existing or neighboring production sites. Some of the factors that need to be taken into consideration include planting on sites with low risk of pest introduction based on the prevailing wind direction, assessing water availability and quality, assessing the historical use of a site if newly acquired for plants that will be grown in open fields. This will provide knowledge of the pests, which might be of concern, and will also provide information on the potential buildup of chemical control products. Developing maps that locate the production and propagation areas, receiving, storage, and shipping areas, designated cleaning, treatment, and disposal areas, and neighboring areas. The flow of plant material should be described on this map, and production and propagation areas should be considered areas of higher risk for pest introduction. When considering the layout of the place of production, designate separate areas for processing, production, and propagation. A final factor is ensuring staff, visitors, and service providers use designated parking areas located in low-risk areas. Where needed, include washing facilities for cleaning and disinfecting equipment and vehicles. Next, it is important to clearly identify biosecurity zones where applicable. Biosecurity zones are classified based on the use of an area, risk of pest spread, access to the area, and biosecurity measures required to prevent the introduction and spread of pests in a place of production. A controlled access zone is a place of production area within a place of production or a field area where access to that area is restricted or otherwise controlled. A restricted access zone is an area generally located inside the controlled access zone where access by people or equipment is further restricted, providing an extra level of protection. High-risk activities that may require a restricted access zone include an infested field or propagation area. Restricted access zones may be required to protect plant materials such as mother stock or an area where a pest is present. Examples of low-risk activities that may require a controlled access zone include production fields, storage, and product handling areas. It is important to assess activities that are carried out in the place of production to identify biosecurity zones. Once the zones are classified, entry and exit into and between biosecurity zones should be controlled by designating access points and using various techniques and tools such as signs or automated doors. Based on the location of the biosecurity zones, specific routes should be established to move inputs, people, vehicles, equipment, and outputs to ensure pests are not spread from high to low-risk areas. When training staff on biosecurity protocols implemented at the place of production, information on biosecurity zones and appropriate traffic flows should be included. And equipment should be cleaned and disinfected when there is the need to move from high-risk to low-risk areas. Pests can be carried on footwear, clothing, hair, and vehicles, and equipment may harbor pests. Therefore, a third farm operational management practice is to assess the movement of people, vehicles, and equipment so that pests are not introduced or spread within a place of production. Some of the considerations that can be implemented include making a copy of the biosecurity plan accessible to employees and providing training on biosecurity protocols. Ensuring visitors and service providers are accompanied by farm staff when moving through production, storage, or shipping areas. Limiting access to restricted areas to authorized personnel only. Transporting visitors within a farm, using a farm vehicle. When this is not possible, off-farm vehicles and equipment are cleaned prior to entry into the place of production. And cleaning and disinfecting equipment between uses in different production areas. To minimize cleaning of equipment, strategically sequence activities. For example, all tools used for pruning plants should be disinfected before use and between crops or different sections within the place of production, especially if a pest is present. Receiving inputs such as propagated material, soil, growing media, water, or packaging material has the potential to introduce pests to the place of production. A key farm operational management biosecurity measure is to ensure production inputs are not a potential source of pests. Biosecurity measures can include inspecting all production inputs for signs of pests prior to entry to the production areas, and if pests are present, inputs are disposed of or cleaned and disinfected. Maintaining purchasing records of the source of a production input, number of plants, and date planted can be important when responding to a pest detection. Evaluating the risks associated with supplier of propagated material. If the source or risk level of inputs is unknown, it may be considered high risk and segregated from final product or propagated material to allow for monitoring of pests. Monitoring water quality. If required, treat recycled water to prevent the spread of pests within the place of production. Finally, disinfecting recyclable or reusable plant containers is a good practice to ensure pests are not introduced by production inputs. Another farm operational management biosecurity measure is to ensure finished product leaving the place of production is free of pests of concern. This is a particularly important measure to implement to maintain market access. Production waste should also be managed, treated, and disposed of to reduce the risk of spreading pests. To that end, it is important to monitor for pests through the growing season and until harvest to ensure your products are free from pests as was covered by the plant health management biosecurity measures already discussed. Quality assurance is an important consideration when a product leaves a place of production. Make sure to inspect the final product for pests of concern and affix a label correctly to enable accurate traceability, if necessary. Other measures include proper disposal of all culls and plant waste by deep burial or transportation to municipal disposal sites. During disposal, it is important to prevent the release of pests, as infected plant material presents a high risk of reinfecting the same crop or infecting other crops. The standard also highlights the need to keep all buildings and equipment in good repair as an effective biosecurity measure to prevent pest introduction. This would include implementing a routine facility and property maintenance program and keeping a record of these maintenance activities. This program should include both the interior and exterior of the place of production. As an example, a maintenance program for greenhouses may include a weed-free buffer around the greenhouse, minimizing or eliminating areas where pests can enter by ensuring holes are fixed, doors closed properly, and windows can be closed. And finally, developing and implementing a procedure to clean the greenhouses, which includes cleaning the structure and irrigation system. Some operations are highly mechanized, and this equipment is not always easy to clean. When using this machinery, inspect and verify that propagated material is free of pests of concern to mitigate the risk of pest spread. The implementation of good biosecurity measures go hand in hand with a strong education, training, and communication program that will help to ensure that all the measures discussed so far are implemented by those who enter the place of production. A well-developed, communicated, and implemented training program will provide visitors, service providers, and employees with an understanding of the importance of proactive biosecurity. This would include training staff to implement the farm biosecurity protocols and letting them know where to access a copy. Information should be provided in the appropriate language for employees. Employees should also be trained in crop production practices, the identification of pests, symptoms of pests, and response protocols. Ensuring visitors and service providers are made aware of biosecurity protocols and communicating biosecurity protocols to neighbors. Signage and visual aids can be used to communicate biosecurity protocols within a place of production. Finally, monitoring, reviewing, and changing the biosecurity plan and training program as situations change and new information becomes available. For example, when there is a new emerging pest. At the end of the standard is a self-evaluation checklist that will help identify areas where biosecurity measures may be required, providing a framework for the development of a biosecurity plan. Carefully evaluate whether a measure is applicable or not to a place of production. It is recognized that not all measures will apply to each of the various commodities and production types included in the scope of the standard. The producer guides provide information on biosecurity practices that can be implemented at the farm level to achieve the target outcomes of the National Farm Level Biosecurity Standard for the greenhouse, nursery, and floriculture sectors. The three producer guides to accompany the standard are the Greenhouse Vegetable Sector Biosecurity Guide, the Nursery Sector Biosecurity Guide, and the Floriculture Sector Biosecurity Guide. The producer guides are voluntary and provide best practices and biosecurity measures for consideration at your place of production. The producer guides follow the same sections as the standard, with target outcomes, benefits, and checklists. It is recognized that each biosecurity plan will be specific to each place of production, and not all the recommendations in these guides will be universally applicable. However, they are useful to create a biosecurity plan and implement biosecurity measures tailored to your place of production. The guides provide various examples of how the information may be applied and include various example tools and reports in the appendices, such as biosecurity signs, pest fact sheets, sign-in logs, and reporting templates. We would like to thank the Greenhouse, Nursery, and Floriculture Biosecurity Advisory Committee for developing the standard and the producer guides for the greenhouse, nursery, and floriculture sectors. Many thanks to the Canadian Plant Health Council and the Biosecurity Working Group for their expertise, guidance, and contributions to these video podcasts. Finally, our thanks goes to all greenhouse, nursery, and floriculture producers for your efforts every day to protect your farms and other places of production from pests through the implementation of biosecurity measures.